You want to talk about the big picture? Let's talk about the jet stream. Because right now, frankly, it's a mess. And that mess is rewriting the entire severe weather playbook for the second half of May. Here's what you need to understand. Underneath all the clouds and the radar returns, the engine driving this whole pattern is this massive, sprawling dip in the jet stream that has parked itself right over the Rocky Mountains. Think of it like a huge trough, a southward plunge of fast-moving air that has decided to set up shop from the four corners all the way up into the Canadian border. On paper, that setup usually screams trouble. A big dip in the jet like that, especially this late in the spring, typically acts like a vacuum cleaner, pulling a high volume of Pacific moisture straight across the desert Southwest and into the plains. And to be fair, that part is happening. You can see the moisture streaming in, a river of Gulf air riding up over that dip, and it is carrying a lot of fuel. But here is the catch, and it is a big one. The system right now is missing two of the most critical ingredients you need to turn a stormy day into a disaster movie. Those ingredients are high instability, which is just a fancy way of saying really hot, volatile air near the ground, and strong wind shear, which is the change in wind speed and direction as you go up into the atmosphere. Because these two ingredients are completely out of sync, what you are not going to see over the next few days is a massive multi-state tornado outbreak. You can put that worry aside. No lines of violent long-track wedge tornadoes plowing through dozens of counties. That is not the story here. Instead, what the United States is entering is a much weirder, much more frustrating cycle of severe weather. Meteorologists call it mesoscale severe weather. In plain English, that means highly localized, day-by-day, hour-by-hour events that can shift direction on a dime, intensify in 20 minutes, and catch even well-prepared communities completely off guard. One county might get hammered with grapefruit-sized hail, while the next county oversees nothing but a few sprinkles and some gusty wind. This is not the kind of setup where you can draw a big, confident red polygon on a map and say everyone in here needs to be in the basement. This is the kind of setup where you have to stay glued to your phone's weather alerts, because the threat can materialize out of a clear blue sky faster than you think. Let's walk through this day by day, because the pattern changes subtly but meaningfully each afternoon. Starting with Wednesday, which is today. If you live in the East or the Mid-Atlantic, you are probably looking at cloudy skies and feeling a little humidity creeping in. That is the appetizer. The main course arrives later today, when a marginal risk for severe thunderstorms stretches all the way from southern New England, think parts of Connecticut and Rhode Island, all the way down through the spine of the Appalachians and into Kentucky. Now, marginal risk is the lowest level on the 1 to 5 scale, but don't let the name fool you into ignoring it. In this particular setup, marginal just means the coverage is spotty, not that the storms are weak. What we are expecting here is high storm coverage, around 70% of that corridor seeing at least a thunderstorm, with isolated damaging winds and scattered hail moving east at a pretty quick clip of 30 to 40 miles per hour. The main threat in the east today is straight-line winds knocking down tree limbs and power lines, along with hail that could range from penny-sized up to quarter-sized in the stronger cores. Meanwhile, shift your eyes all the way to the southern plains, specifically far western Texas. There is a slight risk, one level up from marginal, sitting over the high terrain south of Lubbock and Odessa. This is a completely different animal. Out there, you are going to see isolated, discrete supercell storms fire up in the late afternoon. Discrete means individual, rotating thunderstorms, not tangled up in a messy line. And those discrete supercells bring a very real threat of very large hail. We are talking golf ball to tennis ball size, along with damaging wind gusts that could exceed 70 miles per hour. The one piece of good news for West Texas today? The tornado risk remains very low, near zero, because despite the rotation aloft, the low-level winds just aren't turning the right way to put a tornado on the ground. Now we move to Thursday, and this is where the pattern gets interesting in a much quieter way. Across most of the central and southern plains, the severe threat levels drop off a cliff. Seriously, if you live in Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, or North Texas, Thursday is looking like a breather. What you will see instead are typical summer-like pop-up storms dotting the Ohio Valley in the southeast, the kind that rumble for 20 minutes, drop some heavy rain, and then fall apart as the sun goes down. Nothing organized, nothing with any real staying power. But there is one tiny exception, and it is a very specific one. Focus your attention on the Colorado East Plains, specifically the area southeast of Denver. Think out toward Lyman and down toward La Junta.
That little pocket has been highlighted as a marginal risk zone. And here is why it matters. Because of the way the jet stream dip interacts with the front range topography, there is enhanced local wind shear in that narrow corridor that you don't see anywhere else in the country on Thursday. And that shear, even with only marginal instability, creates a low but real chance for an isolated tornado. We are not talking about a multi-vortex monster. We are talking about a brief spin-up tornado that could touch down in a rural area, kick up some dust, damage a barn or two, and lift back into the clouds within 5 or 10 minutes. But if you are a storm chaser or a rancher in that part of Colorado, Thursday afternoon is the day to keep one eye on the western horizon, because that little marginal risk might be the only show in town.
Friday is when the pattern takes another turn. The risk zones shift slightly eastward, and that is going to put more people in the conversation. By Friday afternoon, we are establishing a slight risk area across portions of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And this time, it includes some actual cities. Think Oklahoma City, think Abilene, think Wichita Falls. This is not a huge outbreak, but it is a notable uptick in organization compared to the previous 2 days. The primary threats on Friday will be damaging wind clusters and large hail. What do I mean by wind clusters? Instead of isolated supercells, you are likely to see small bowing segments, arcs of thunderstorms that produce a concentrated burst of straight-line winds as they move through. Those clusters can generate wind damage over a swath 10 to 15 miles wide, knocking down trees and power poles in a way that looks like a tornado came through even though it was just straight-line wind. Hail will also be a concern, especially in the early evening hours before the storms congeal into a line. Now, there is a small chance that a few supercells fire in the Texas Panhandle, around Amarillo and down toward Lubbock, but if they do, they are going to be fighting a losing battle. The problem on Friday is a lack of deep surface moisture. The ground isn't as wet as it should be, and the dew points, the measure of low-level moisture, are running about 5 to 10 degrees lower than you would want for a serious tornado setup. What that means is that even if you get a supercell with good rotational loft, that rotation has a very hard time making it all the way to the ground because the air near the surface is just too dry and too stable. So the tornado threat on Friday is effectively near zero. Maybe a brief spin up in the most intense core, but nothing that would warrant a tornado watch. The story is wind and hail, pure and simple. Now we get to the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and this is where the whole pattern basically takes a nap. The jet stream, that big dip over the Rockies, weakens significantly and loses its organization. It goes from being a defined trough to just sort of a lazy ripple in the upper atmosphere. When that happens, the forcing, the lift that kicks off widespread severe weather just disappears. So what you are left with is widespread, ordinary summer thunderstorms across the Ohio Valley, the Southeast, and the East Coast. We are talking about garden-variety afternoon pop-ups, the kind that produce some lightning, some brief heavy downpours, and maybe some gusty winds, but nothing that would make the Storm Prediction Center issue a watch box. No organized tornado outbreaks are forecasted for the weekend, none at all. And honestly, that is a good thing, because it makes the weekend an excellent window for steady, non-destructive rainfall. If you have a garden, if you have a lawn that has been looking crispy, if you are a farmer in the Carolinas or Georgia who has been watching the soil moisture dip lower and lower, this weekend is your friend. The rain that falls on Saturday and Sunday will be the soaking kind, the kind that sinks in instead of running off, the kind that actually helps. So enjoy the quiet weekend, because the pattern has a memory, and that memory is about to wake back up. But while we are talking about rain, we have to talk about two completely opposite stories happening at the same time. First, the Southeast. The Southeast is on track to receive critical drought relief over the next 8 days, and I mean critical. We are not talking about a few passing showers. We're talking about a sustained multi-day rain event. Areas like New Orleans and Houston, which have been flirting with moderate drought conditions for weeks, are projected to pick up 4 to 7 inches of rain through the end of the month. That is a lot of water in a short period. It could cause some localized street flooding in the usual poor drainage spots, but overall, that rain is desperately needed. Even cities farther east like Atlanta, Montgomery, and Charleston will see a healthy ½ to 2 inches, which is enough to green things up and knock the dust off the trees. The ground in the Southeast is going to drink this up. Conversely, and this is the painful part, the West Coast will remain completely dry, not a drop.
Zero precipitation is forecast from San Diego all the way up to Seattle for at least the next 10 days. And not only is it dry, but strong local winds are going to pick up, especially through the passes and canyons of Western California. When you pair strong winds with zero precipitation and vegetation that is already bone dry from a record dry winter, you get elevated fire weather risks. That is the official term, but what it means on the ground is that any spark, whether from a downed power line, a dragging trailer chain, or even a discarded cigarette, has the potential to turn into a fast-moving, dangerous wildfire. So if you live in Western California, from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles and into the Inland Empire, do not be fooled by the lack of a red flag warning yet. The conditions are there, the winds are coming, and the ground is dry. Be careful with anything that could create a spark over the next week.
Now, I want to address something you might have noticed if you stepped outside this morning, especially if you live anywhere from the Great Lakes down through the Ohio Valley. You are not imagining it. It is not just you. A massive plunge of cold air has dropped down from Canada, riding the backside of that disorganized jet stream dip, and it has sent morning temperatures in the upper Midwest down into the 30s and 40s. We are talking about frost advisories in parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota in the last week of May, which is almost unheard of. Chicago woke up to low 40s, Detroit saw upper 30s in the northern suburbs. And it is not just a morning chill. High temperatures across the Great Plains and the Midwest are tracking 15 to 25 degrees below seasonal averages. Instead of the usual mid-70s and low 80s, people in Omaha, Des Moines, and Kansas City are seeing highs struggle to reach the mid-50s. That is November weather, not May weather. And here is why that matters for severe weather. This lack of intense heat is actively starving incoming storm systems of the energy they need to turn violent. Thunderstorms feed on warm, unstable air near the ground. When the ground is cold, when the air is 55 degrees instead of 75, it acts like a blanket that smothers the updrafts before they can get going. So while the dynamics aloft, the wind shear and the jet stream energy might be enough to create rotating storms in theory, the cold ground and cold surface air mean those storms never get the juice they need to become severe. That cold buffer is the only thing keeping this entire pattern from exploding into something much more dangerous. It is a lid on a pot that would otherwise be boiling over. But do not get comfortable with that cold buffer, because it is temporary. I want to be very clear about that. By the middle of next week, everything changes. The cold air mass that has been sitting over the northern tier of the country is going to get shoved out by something much warmer and much more humid. A surge of warm air out of the Gulf of Mexico, what meteorologists call a return flow, is going to push northward like a freight train. Temperatures are going to rebound quickly, and by the time we get to the middle of next week, we are talking about 80s as far north as Fargo, North Dakota, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. That is a 40-degree temperature swing in less than 7 days for some of those locations. And when you combine that returning warmth with the moisture that the jet stream has been pulling across the country, the lid comes off. The cold buffer evaporates. And that is when the models start getting interesting. In fact, I want to give you a heads up on something the longer range guidance is starting to show. The models are already tracking a much more intense, widespread severe system, trying to organize around the very tail end of May, literally the last 2 or 3 days of the month and bleeding into the first few days of June. This is not a guarantee, and I want to be careful not to hype something that is still a week to 10 days out. But the signal is there on multiple reliable models, and it is consistent. The ingredients that are out of sync right now, the instability and the wind shear, look like they are going to come back into perfect alignment by late next week. When that happens, the disorganized jet stream we have been dealing with this week reorganizes into something much more classic, much more dangerous. So enjoy the quiet, localized mesoscale pattern we are in right now. Enjoy the soaking rain in the southeast. Enjoy the cold mornings if you're in the Midwest. Because all of that is a prelude. The severe weather season is not over. It took a week off, but it is coming back. And when it does, it is going to come back with a vengeance. Keep your forecast apps handy. Keep your NOAA weather radio batteries fresh. And most importantly, do not get lulled into thinking that a quiet week means a quiet rest of the spring. The big picture is changing, and the next chapter is already being written out over the Pacific. We will be watching every frame of it.